Imagine you're standing at the edge of a vast, fog-covered valley. You can hear sounds from within, but you can't see what's making them. Someone asks you, "What's in that valley?" Your honest answer would be, "I don't know. And from here, I can't tell for certain." This is essentially what agnosticism represents in the realm of belief about God or the divine. Agnosticism is the philosophical position that the existence of God, the divine, or the supernatural is either unknowable in principle or currently unknown to us. To understand agnosticism better, we need to explore the concept of knowledge itself. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of knowledge, how we know what we know, and what the limits of human knowledge might be. Agnosticism sits in a unique position on the spectrum of belief. The Dawkins scale illustrates this beautifully, showing 7 different positions ranging from strong theism to strong atheism, with agnosticism occupying the middle ground. Think of agnosticism like being a careful scientist. When asked about the existence of extraterrestrial life, a scientist might say, "Based on current evidence, I cannot definitively prove or disprove the existence of alien life. The universe is vast, but our knowledge is limited." Agnosticism is fundamentally about suspended judgment. It's not saying God doesn't exist, like atheism, nor God exists, like theism. Instead, it's saying, I don't have sufficient evidence to make that determination, and perhaps such evidence is impossible to obtain. Consider a real-world example. Imagine you're a detective investigating a cold case from 50 years ago. Most evidence has been lost or degraded. When asked who committed this crime, an honest detective would say, "Based on available evidence, I cannot determine the perpetrator with certainty." This is the agnostic approach to knowledge. Agnosticism acknowledges the limits of human knowledge while remaining intellectually honest. It's a position that says, given the current state of evidence and the nature of the question itself, the most reasonable stance is to admit uncertainty rather than claim knowledge we don't possess. Understanding the differences between agnosticism, atheism, and theism is essential for grasping these distinct philosophical positions. Each represents a fundamentally different approach to the question of God's existence. Think of this like a courtroom scenario. Theism acts as the prosecution, presenting the case that God exists. Atheism serves as the defense, arguing against God's existence. Agnosticism takes the role of the neutral judge, stating there isn't enough evidence to make a definitive ruling either way. Let's examine this more clearly with a visual diagram that shows how these positions relate to each other. This diagram illustrates the key distinctions based on both belief and knowledge claims. Here's a real-world example to make this clearer. Imagine 3 friends discussing whether aliens exist. Sarah, a theist-like thinker, believes aliens definitely exist based on the vastness of the universe. Mike, taking an atheist-like position, argues there's no credible evidence for aliens. Jenny, representing the agnostic view, says we simply don't have enough information to know either way. The key distinction is that agnosticism focuses on knowledge rather than belief. While theists and atheists make claims about what they believe to be true, agnostics emphasize the limitations of human knowledge. They argue that the question of God's existence may be fundamentally unknowable or that we currently lack sufficient evidence to make a determination. Understanding these distinctions helps clarify common misconceptions. Agnosticism isn't fence-sitting or indecision. It's a principled philosophical position that prioritizes intellectual honesty about the limits of human knowledge when it comes to ultimate questions about existence. Imagine you're standing before a locked mystery box. Inside might be the answer to whether God exists. 2 people approach this same box with very different attitudes about what we can know. Agnosticism isn't just one single position. It comes in 2 distinct flavors that approach the question of divine knowledge very differently. Strong agnosticism takes a definitive stance. It claims that human beings are fundamentally incapable of knowing whether God exists. This isn't just about lacking current evidence. It's about the impossibility of ever having such knowledge. Weak agnosticism, on the other hand, is more optimistic about human potential. It acknowledges our current ignorance, but leaves the door open for future discovery. We simply don't have enough information right now. Think of 2 doctors facing an unknown disease. The strong agnostic doctor believes the disease is medically unknowable, beyond human understanding. The weak agnostic doctor believes we simply haven't identified it yet, but future research might reveal the answer. This diagram shows how strong and weak agnosticism fit into the broader landscape of theological positions. Notice how agnosticism intersects with both theistic and atheistic beliefs, creating nuanced positions. The fundamental difference comes down to possibility. Strong agnosticism sees the door to divine knowledge as permanently locked. No key exists. Weak agnosticism believes we simply haven't found the right key yet, but one might exist. Both positions share intellectual humility about our current knowledge, but they differ fundamentally in their view of human potential to understand the divine. This distinction shapes how agnostics approach questions of faith, evidence, and the search for meaning. In 1869, British biologist Thomas Huxley found himself at a dinner party with fellow intellectuals, discussing the great questions of existence. When pressed about his religious beliefs, Huxley realized he needed a new word to describe his position. Huxley coined the term agnosticism, from the Greek word agnostos, meaning unknown or unknowable. He wanted to distinguish his position from both theism and atheism, arguing that we simply cannot know whether God exists or not. Huxley's creation of this term wasn't happening in a vacuum. The 19th century was a time of tremendous scientific discovery. Darwin's theory of evolution was challenging traditional religious beliefs, and new geological evidence was questioning biblical timelines. But the roots of agnostic thinking stretch back much further than Huxley. Ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates famously declared, "I know that I know nothing." Eastern philosophies also embraced uncertainty and the limits of human knowledge. From ancient Greece to 19th century England, there's been a continuous thread of intellectual humility, the recognition that human knowledge has limits. Huxley simply gave this ancient wisdom a modern name and scientific framework. Many people assume that being agnostic means having no faith at all, but this is a common misconception. Agnosticism and faith can actually coexist in meaningful ways. The reality is quite different. Agnostics can have deep faith without claiming certainty about God's existence. They embrace the mystery while still finding profound meaning in spiritual practices and beliefs. Consider Sarah, a hospital chaplain who identifies as agnostic. She doesn't claim to know if God exists, yet she finds deep meaning in providing comfort to patients and families. Her faith isn't about certainty, it's about service and compassion. Many agnostics find value in religious traditions and communities without requiring absolute belief. They might participate in rituals, celebrate holidays, or engage in prayer as meaningful practices rather than statements of certainty. This approach to faith is about finding meaning without demanding certainty. It's the recognition that mystery and meaning can coexist, that we can live with purpose and hope even when we acknowledge the limits of human knowledge. In courtrooms around the world, judges and juries must set aside personal beliefs to focus solely on evidence and legal precedent. This principle of neutrality mirrors the agnostic approach to knowledge. Lady Justice, the symbol of legal systems worldwide, wears a blindfold for a crucial reason. She cannot see the race, religion, or social status of those before her. Like agnostic thinking, legal judgment must be based on evidence alone, not personal beliefs or assumptions. Legal systems operate on three core agnostic principles. First, facts matter more than opinions. Second, evidence trumps assumptions. Third, established law takes precedence over personal beliefs. These principles ensure that justice remains blind to bias. Consider the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Despite widespread personal beliefs supporting racial segregation, the Supreme Court set aside social prejudices and focused purely on constitutional evidence. They determined that separate educational facilities were inherently unequal, regardless of popular opinion. Today's courts continue applying agnostic principles daily. DNA evidence has overturned hundreds of wrongful convictions, regardless of how convinced people were of guilt. Scientific testimony guides complex cases involving technology or medicine. Constitutional law consistently supersedes popular religious or cultural beliefs when they conflict with established legal precedent. Legal systems worldwide demonstrate how agnostic principles create fairer outcomes. By suspending personal judgment and focusing on verifiable evidence, courts protect citizens from bias and ensure equal treatment under the law. The scales of justice weigh facts, not beliefs, creating a foundation for true impartiality. In the early 2000s, a movement known as New Atheism emerged, characterized by an aggressive and confrontational approach to religious belief. Led by figures like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, this movement took a militant stance against religion. In response to this aggressive stance, a different approach emerged, what scholars call New Agnosticism. This movement represents a more moderate and nuanced form of skepticism, one that emphasizes intellectual humility rather than militant opposition. Central to New Agnosticism is the concept of intellectual humility, the recognition that human knowledge has limits and that certainty about ultimate questions may be impossible. Recent research has developed sophisticated tools to measure this intellectual humility. A perfect example of this new agnostic mindset comes from the famous author Graham Greene. When offered the chance to meet Padre Pio, a revered Catholic saint, Greene declined, saying, "I didn't want to change my life by meeting a saint." This exemplifies the new agnostic approach, maintaining intellectual distance while acknowledging the possibility of the sacred. Critics argue that despite its intellectual humility, New Agnosticism may function as practical atheism. In daily life, New Agnostics often live as if no divine intervention will occur, making decisions based on naturalistic assumptions. Yet this approach offers a more nuanced and less confrontational path than militant atheism, appealing to those who value both skepticism and intellectual modesty. Recent psychological research has revealed fascinating insights into the minds of agnostics. Unlike atheists or religious believers, agnostics display a unique psychological profile that reflects their philosophical position of uncertainty about divine existence. One of the most prominent traits researchers have identified is higher levels of indecisiveness. Imagine Sarah, a college student choosing her major. While her religious friend confidently selects theology and her atheist friend chooses philosophy, Sarah finds herself torn between multiple options, constantly weighing evidence and possibilities. Research also shows that agnostics tend to exhibit higher levels of neuroticism. This psychological trait encompasses anxiety, emotional instability, and heightened sensitivity to stress. The uncertainty inherent in agnostic thinking can contribute to increased worry and emotional turbulence. This psychological profile often manifests as an internal struggle. Picture the mind of an agnostic as a constant debate between different possibilities. Unlike those with firm beliefs, agnostics experience ongoing mental tension as they weigh evidence and consider multiple perspectives simultaneously. However, this psychological profile also includes positive traits. Agnostics show a stronger tendency to search for alternatives and demonstrate remarkable open-mindedness. They actively seek out different perspectives and remain receptive to new information, making them excellent critical thinkers and problem solvers. This unique psychological profile creates a complex individual who may struggle with certainty but excels at nuanced thinking. The agnostic mind represents a fascinating balance between doubt and curiosity, anxiety and openness, making them valuable contributors to philosophical discourse and scientific inquiry. Agnostic atheism represents a nuanced position that many people hold without even realizing it. It's a stance that combines two seemingly different approaches to the question of God's existence. Imagine you're asked whether aliens are currently visiting Earth. You might say, "I don't believe they are, but I can't prove they aren't." This captures the essence of agnostic atheism perfectly. Agnostic atheism applies this same logic to the question of God. It separates two distinct dimensions, what you believe and what you claim to know for certain. An agnostic atheist occupies a specific position on this grid. They fall on the don't believe side for belief and the don't know side for knowledge claims. This concept becomes clearer when we visualize how agnostic atheism relates to other positions. This diagram shows the overlapping relationships between different stances on God's existence. In practical terms, an agnostic atheist might say, I live my life as if God doesn't exist, but I acknowledge that ultimate proof either way is beyond human capability. This position allows for intellectual honesty about the limits of knowledge. This differs from strong atheism, which claims to know that God doesn't exist. Agnostic atheists maintain intellectual humility, admitting the possibility of being wrong while still lacking belief. Many scientists and philosophers adopt this position. They base their worldview on naturalistic explanations while remaining open to evidence. It's a position that values both skepticism and intellectual honesty. Agnostic atheism represents a thoughtful middle ground that separates belief from certainty. It allows people to live according to their convictions while maintaining intellectual humility about ultimate questions. Around the world, we're witnessing a profound shift in how people relate to religion and belief. This transformation, known as secularization, is creating new pathways for spiritual and philosophical exploration. This global map reveals a striking pattern. While regions like Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia show high levels of religious importance in daily life, much of Europe, Australia, and parts of the Americas display significantly lower religious engagement. This geographic divide illustrates the uneven pace of secularization worldwide. The blue regions represent areas where religion plays a smaller role in daily life, while the orange and red areas show where religious belief remains central to people's lives. This pattern reflects decades of social, economic, and educational changes. But perhaps nowhere is this trend more evident than in the generational differences we see within individual countries. Let's examine how religious belief has changed across generations in the United States. This data tells a compelling story. From the silent generation to younger millennials, we see a consistent decline in religious belief and practice. Each successive generation shows lower rates of belief in God, daily prayer, and weekly service attendance. This downward trend represents more than just changing religious affiliation. It reflects a fundamental shift in how younger people approach questions of belief, truth, and meaning. Many are moving toward positions of intellectual humility and evidence-based reasoning. This is where agnosticism becomes particularly relevant. As traditional religious certainties give way to questioning and doubt, many people find themselves in a middle ground, neither fully believing nor completely rejecting the possibility of the divine. Agnosticism offers a thoughtful alternative to the traditional theism-atheism divide. While theists assert belief in God and atheists deny God's existence, agnostics acknowledge the limitations of human knowledge and maintain that such ultimate questions may be unknowable. This middle path appeals particularly to younger generations who have grown up in an era of scientific advancement and information abundance. They value empirical evidence while remaining open to possibilities beyond current understanding. Consider Sarah, a 25-year-old graduate student in biology. Raised in a religious household, she now finds herself questioning traditional beliefs while remaining open to spiritual possibilities. Her scientific training has taught her to value evidence, but she recognizes the limits of what science can currently explain about consciousness, meaning, and ultimate reality. Sarah represents millions of young people navigating this intellectual landscape. They're not rejecting spirituality outright, but they're approaching it with a more critical, evidence-based mindset. This is the essence of how secularization feeds into agnostic thinking. This trend has profound implications for society. As more people adopt agnostic perspectives, we see increased emphasis on intellectual humility, evidence-based reasoning, and openness to multiple viewpoints. Rather than dogmatic certainty, there's a growing appreciation for the complexity and mystery of existence. The relationship between secularization and agnosticism represents a significant shift in human thought. As societies become more secular, they create intellectual space for positions like agnosticism that embrace uncertainty while remaining open to discovery. This trend suggests that the future may belong not to rigid belief systems, but to approaches that balance skepticism with wonder. Is agnosticism a permanent worldview or something that changes over time? Many experts suggest that agnosticism might be a transient state, a temporary position that evolves as we journey through life. Throughout our lives, we encounter different experiences, meet new people, and face various challenges. These experiences can shift our perspective on fundamental questions about existence and belief. Consider Sarah, a college student who grew up in a religious household. She starts with strong belief, but university studies in philosophy and science introduce doubt. This leads her to agnosticism, acknowledging she simply doesn't know. Research shows that several key factors influence how our beliefs evolve over time. Education exposes us to new ideas and ways of thinking. Major life events can shake or strengthen our convictions. Our social environment plays a crucial role. The people we surround ourselves with shape our perspectives. And as we age and mature, we often develop more nuanced views about complex questions. Consider Marcus, whose beliefs evolved significantly over 3 decades. He started as a strong believer in his 20s, but graduate studies in psychology introduced questions about the nature of faith and evidence. By his 40s, after experiencing personal loss and studying different philosophical traditions, Marcus identified as agnostic. He found comfort in admitting uncertainty rather than claiming definitive knowledge about the divine. In his 50s, Marcus discovered meditation and found meaning in spiritual practices without requiring specific beliefs about God. His agnostic phase had been a bridge to a more personalized spiritual understanding. Rather than viewing agnosticism as a fixed position, we might better understand it as part of a dynamic spiritual and intellectual journey. For many people, it represents a thoughtful pause, a time of honest uncertainty that can lead to deeper understanding. This transient nature doesn't diminish the value of agnosticism. Instead, it highlights the importance of intellectual humility and the recognition that our understanding of fundamental questions may continue to evolve as we grow and learn. Research shows that agnostics possess a unique psychological profile. They tend to be more open-minded and less dogmatic than both religious believers and atheists. But what does this actually mean in practice? Let's explore this through a real-world scenario. Imagine 3 people discussing a controversial scientific discovery that challenges traditional beliefs. The dogmatic thinker immediately rejects the discovery, saying, "This contradicts what I believe, so it must be wrong." They refuse to consider new evidence that challenges their existing worldview. In contrast, the agnostic thinker responds with curiosity and humility. "I'm not sure what to think. Let me examine the evidence carefully before forming any conclusions." The open-minded thinker shows flexibility. "This is interesting. While it challenges my current understanding, I'm willing to revise my views based on solid evidence." Notice how agnostics share this open-minded approach. They embrace uncertainty rather than rushing to definitive conclusions. This creates space for tolerance and understanding. This psychological profile manifests in everyday situations. When faced with moral dilemmas, agnostics are more likely to consider multiple perspectives rather than applying rigid rules. The key insight is that agnostics value questions over definitive answers. They understand that complex issues rarely have simple solutions, and this humility makes them better listeners and more empathetic individuals. This psychological profile explains why agnostics often serve as bridges in polarized discussions. Their willingness to acknowledge uncertainty and consider multiple viewpoints makes them valuable mediators in our increasingly divided world. In the mid-19th century, a quiet naturalist aboard the HMS Beagle would forever change how humanity understood its place in the universe. Charles Darwin's revolutionary ideas didn't just transform biology, they sparked a new way of thinking about knowledge, evidence, and the divine. Darwin's approach was revolutionary, not just for what he discovered, but for how he discovered it. Unlike religious explanations that relied on faith and scripture, Darwin built his theories on careful observation, systematic evidence collection, and logical reasoning. Darwin's theory of evolution directly challenged the prevailing religious explanation of creation. Where traditional views saw divine design and fixed species, Darwin presented evidence for gradual change through natural selection. This wasn't just a scientific disagreement, it was a fundamental shift in how to understand truth itself. Darwin's influence extended far beyond biology. His emphasis on evidence over authority, observation over revelation, and natural explanations over supernatural ones provided a new framework for understanding reality. This approach directly contributed to the rise of agnosticism in the late 19th century. Darwin's work created a domino effect in intellectual circles. If religious explanations for the origin of species could be wrong, what about other religious claims? This questioning led many thinkers to adopt agnostic positions, acknowledging that ultimate questions about God and the divine might simply be beyond human knowledge. Darwin himself became increasingly agnostic throughout his life, moving from religious belief toward uncertainty about divine matters. His scientific method, demanding evidence, embracing uncertainty, and remaining open to revision, became a model for agnostic thinking that continues to influence how we approach ultimate questions today. Meet Sarah, a philosophy professor who practices meditation daily, finds deep meaning in nature, and explores questions about consciousness and purpose. Yet she doesn't claim to know whether God exists or what ultimate reality might be. Sarah represents a growing number of people who embrace what we might call agnostic spirituality. This approach separates spiritual practice from religious certainty, allowing for deep personal exploration without requiring belief in specific doctrines. The key insight is that spirituality and religious certainty are not the same thing. An agnostic can engage deeply with spiritual practices like meditation, contemplation, or connection with nature, while maintaining intellectual honesty about what they can truly know. Consider Marcus, a scientist who practices yoga and finds profound meaning in moments of transcendence during his practice. He experiences what many would call spiritual states, yet he remains open about whether these experiences point to anything beyond natural brain processes. This questioning approach is central to agnostic spirituality. Rather than claiming to know the ultimate nature of these experiences, agnostics embrace the mystery while still finding them meaningful and transformative. Personal exploration becomes the heart of agnostic spirituality. Without predetermined answers, individuals are free to discover what practices, experiences, and insights resonate with their authentic selves. Take Elena, an artist who finds spiritual connection through her creative process. She experiences what she describes as touching something greater than herself when painting. Yet she doesn't claim to know whether this something is divine, psychological, or simply the mystery of consciousness itself. This approach offers profound benefits. It allows for genuine spiritual growth without the cognitive dissonance that can arise from holding beliefs that conflict with evidence or reason. It's spirituality grounded in humility and wonder rather than certainty. Agnostic spirituality demonstrates that meaning, purpose, and transcendent experiences don't require absolute answers. Sometimes the most profound spiritual insight is recognizing the limits of what we can know while remaining open to the mystery and beauty of existence itself. In our rapidly changing world, agnosticism has emerged as a significant voice in contemporary discourse. From university campuses to corporate boardrooms, from scientific laboratories to philosophical debates, agnostic thinking shapes how we approach complex questions in modern society. At the heart of agnosticism's modern relevance lies intellectual humility. This approach recognizes the limits of human knowledge while remaining curious and open to new ideas. In our age of information overload and polarized debates, intellectual humility offers a refreshing alternative to dogmatic certainty. Modern agnosticism promotes open-minded discourse in public conversations. Rather than shutting down dialogue with absolute claims, agnostic thinking encourages exploration of multiple perspectives. This approach has proven valuable in addressing complex social issues where simple answers often fall short. Agnosticism provides a balanced perspective at the intersection of science, philosophy, and religion. Rather than dismissing any of these domains, it recognizes that each offers valuable insights while acknowledging the limitations of human understanding in addressing ultimate questions about existence and meaning. In practice, agnostic thinking appears in many modern contexts. Medical ethics committees use agnostic principles when weighing complex bioethical decisions. Environmental policymakers apply agnostic reasoning when dealing with scientific uncertainty. Even in technology development, agnostic approaches help navigate questions about artificial intelligence and human consciousness. As society grapples with increasing polarization and the spread of misinformation, Agnosticism offers valuable tools for navigating uncertainty. It encourages critical thinking, promotes dialogue across differences, and provides a framework for making decisions when complete knowledge is unavailable. This makes agnostic thinking particularly relevant for addressing the complex challenges of the 21st century. When Sarah, a software engineer and agnostic, discovered her company was secretly collecting user data without consent, she faced a profound ethical dilemma. Without religious commandments to guide her, how would she determine the right course of action? This scenario illustrates the fundamental challenge agnostics face in ethics. Without relying on religious texts or divine commandments, they must construct their moral frameworks from other sources. But this doesn't mean they lack strong ethical principles. Agnostic ethics rests on three fundamental pillars. First is reason, using logic and critical thinking to evaluate the consequences of actions. Second is empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Third is humanism, a focus on human dignity, rights, and well-being. This diagram illustrates how empathy develops from basic emotion recognition to various forms of compassion. For agnostics, this emotional intelligence becomes crucial in making ethical decisions. They recognize that understanding others' experiences and emotions is essential for determining what actions cause harm or promote well-being. Returning to Sarah's dilemma, she would use a systematic approach similar to this ethics flowchart. Rather than consulting religious doctrine, she would ask, does this action harm others? Does it violate trust? What are the broader consequences for society? This methodical reasoning process helps agnostics make ethical decisions based on evidence and human impact. Agnostics develop their moral compass by identifying core ethical principles derived from human experience. These typically include minimizing harm, maximizing well-being, respecting individual autonomy, and promoting justice. Unlike religious ethics that may prioritize divine commands, agnostic ethics focuses on tangible human outcomes and experiences. In practice, agnostic ethics leads to strong moral positions on many issues. Environmental protection becomes important based on scientific evidence about climate change and concern for future generations. Social justice emerges from empathy and reasoning about human equality. Medical ethics balances patient autonomy with preventing harm, all without requiring divine authority to justify these positions. Sarah ultimately decided to become a whistleblower, reporting her company's unethical data practices. Her decision wasn't based on religious commandments, but on reasoned analysis of harm, empathy for affected users, and humanistic values about privacy and trust. This illustrates how agnostic ethics can provide a strong moral foundation, demonstrating that ethical behavior doesn't require divine authority. It can emerge from our shared humanity and rational reflection on what promotes human flourishing. Life presents us with profound questions that have puzzled humanity for millennia. What is the meaning of existence? How should we live? What happens after death? These existential questions touch the very core of human experience. While some people turn to religious faith for definitive answers, and others embrace atheistic certainty, agnostics approach these existential questions with a fundamentally different perspective. They recognize that some of life's deepest questions may not have clear, provable answers. At the heart of the agnostic approach to existential questions lies intellectual humility. This means acknowledging the limits of human knowledge and being open to multiple perspectives. Rather than claiming to have all the answers, agnostics cultivate curiosity, openness, and respect for different viewpoints. Consider Sarah, a philosophy professor who lost her faith after studying different religions. Instead of becoming a militant atheist, she embraced agnosticism. When students ask her about the meaning of life, she doesn't give them a definitive answer. Instead, she guides them to explore different philosophical traditions and encourages them to think critically about their own beliefs. Another example is Marcus, a scientist who studies consciousness. Despite his deep knowledge of neuroscience, he remains agnostic about whether consciousness can be fully explained by brain activity alone. He acknowledges that science has limits and that some aspects of human experience might always remain mysterious. The power of agnostic thinking lies in its ability to transform uncertainty from a weakness into a strength. Instead of being paralyzed by not knowing, agnostics use uncertainty as a catalyst for deeper exploration, more thoughtful dialogue, and continued growth. Agnosticism offers a unique lens for engaging with life's biggest questions. By embracing uncertainty and practicing intellectual humility, agnostics create space for ongoing exploration and meaningful dialogue. They demonstrate that not having all the answers can be a profound strength, leading to deeper understanding and more authentic human connections. Agnosticism is one of the most misunderstood philosophical positions. Many people hold incorrect assumptions about what it means to be agnostic, leading to unfair characterizations and oversimplified explanations. When people hear the word agnostic, they often jump to conclusions. Some think agnostics are simply indecisive people who can't make up their minds about God. Others believe agnosticism is just intellectual laziness or apathy toward important questions. The first major misconception is that agnosticism represents apathy or indifference towards spiritual and existential questions. Critics often claim that agnostics simply don't care enough to take a position on God's existence. In reality, agnosticism represents active intellectual engagement, not passive indifference. True agnostics spend considerable time examining evidence, questioning assumptions, and wrestling with complex philosophical problems. They care deeply about truth and meaning. Consider Sarah, a philosophy professor who identifies as agnostic. She has spent decades studying religious texts, scientific evidence, and philosophical arguments. Her agnosticism isn't born from lack of interest, but from rigorous examination that led her to conclude the question of God's existence cannot be definitively answered with current evidence. Another common misconception portrays agnostics as fence-sitters who lack the courage to take a definitive position. This view suggests that agnosticism is intellectual cowardice, a refusal to commit to either belief or disbelief. The truth is that maintaining an agnostic position often requires significant intellectual courage. In a world where people are expected to have strong opinions on everything, admitting uncertainty can be socially and professionally challenging. Agnostics choose intellectual honesty over comfortable certainty. A third misconception suggests that agnostics don't genuinely care about finding truth. Critics argue that if agnostics truly sought answers, they would eventually arrive at either belief or disbelief in God. In reality, agnostics are often the most rigorous truth seekers. They refuse to accept easy answers or comfortable beliefs without sufficient evidence. Their questioning isn't a sign of not caring about truth, but of caring so much that they won't settle for potentially false certainty. Understanding these misconceptions helps us appreciate agnosticism for what it truly is: a thoughtful, evidence-based approach that values intellectual honesty over comfortable certainty. Agnostics don't avoid the big questions. They engage with them more carefully than most, recognizing that the stakes are too high for careless answers. The future of agnosticism stands at a fascinating crossroads. While demographic projections paint one picture, the enduring human need for intellectual humility tells another story. Recent data shows that religiously unaffiliated Americans, including agnostics, reached 20% by 2017. However, this rapid growth has begun to level off, raising questions about future trends. Some demographic experts project that agnosticism may actually decline in the coming decades. But this statistical forecast doesn't tell the whole story. The core principles that define agnosticism, skepticism, and intellectual humility remain profoundly relevant in our modern world. These aren't just philosophical concepts, they're practical tools for navigating uncertainty. The future of agnosticism isn't just about numbers, it's about how societies handle the fundamental tension between faith and reason. Consider how modern societies navigate competing demands. We see this tension everywhere, from climate change debates to medical ethics, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering. Each issue requires balancing evidence with values, facts with beliefs. This is where agnosticism offers something unique, not dogmatic answers, but a balanced approach to uncertainty. Agnosticism's balanced approach, maintaining both trust and skepticism, already shapes many aspects of modern life. Scientific research demands this balance, as does our legal system, medical practice, and policymaking. The future of agnosticism may not depend on demographic trends, but on humanity's continued need for intellectual honesty in an increasingly complex world. Looking ahead, we can envision three possible futures for agnosticism. First, demographic decline as projected by some studies. Second, persistence as a methodological approach, regardless of labels. Third, deeper integration into cultural and institutional practices. Perhaps the most likely future is one where agnostic principles, the willingness to say, I don't know, and the commitment to evidence-based thinking become so embedded in how we approach complex problems that we no longer need the label itself. For many people, agnosticism goes far beyond philosophical debate. It becomes a fundamental part of who they are, woven into the very fabric of their personal identity. At the heart of agnostic identity lies intellectual honesty, the courage to admit what we truly know versus what we don't know. This isn't about being indecisive. It's about being rigorously honest with ourselves. Consider Sarah, a 28-year-old teacher. Growing up in a religious household, she felt constant pressure to have absolute certainty about God's existence. This created internal conflict because she genuinely didn't know. In college, Sarah discovered agnosticism and had a revelation. I don't have to pretend to know what I don't know. This wasn't just a philosophical shift. It was liberating. She could finally be authentic. Today, Sarah's agnosticism influences how she approaches relationships, career decisions, and parenting. She teaches her students to question, to say, I don't know when they don't, and to keep searching for truth. For agnostics, living authentically means embracing a life of ongoing inquiry. It's not about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions and being comfortable with uncertainty. This approach to life creates a unique form of freedom. Agnostics don't feel bound by dogma or pressured to defend absolute positions. They can change their minds when presented with new evidence. This identity manifests in countless daily interactions. In conversations, agnostics are comfortable saying, I don't know, and asking others for their perspectives. At work, they make decisions based on available evidence rather than assumptions. In relationships, they're honest about their doubts and questions, creating deeper, more authentic connections. Their agnosticism becomes a lens through which they view and interact with the world. For these individuals, agnosticism isn't just what they think about God, it's how they approach life itself. It's an identity built on curiosity, humility, and the courage to live with questions rather than false certainties. When we cannot know for certain whether ultimate truths exist, how do we find meaning in our lives? Agnosticism offers a unique perspective. Meaning doesn't require absolute answers. Without absolute certainties, agnostics often discover profound meaning in human relationships. A teacher mentoring students, friends supporting each other through difficult times, or strangers helping in moments of crisis. These connections become sources of deep purpose. Creativity becomes another pathway to meaning. An artist painting their emotions, a musician composing melodies that touch hearts, or a writer crafting stories that inspire others. These creative acts generate meaning independent of cosmic certainties. The natural world offers another source of meaning. Watching a sunset, marveling at the complexity of a flower, or feeling small beneath a starry sky, these moments of wonder create meaning through direct experience and appreciation. Perhaps most importantly, agnosticism teaches us to find meaning in the journey itself, not just the destination. Like a winding road through beautiful countryside, the path of questioning and exploring becomes as valuable as any final answer we might seek. This approach to meaning-making is profound because it doesn't depend on having all the answers. Instead, it celebrates the human capacity to create purpose through connection, creativity, wonder, and the courage to keep exploring even when the ultimate destination remains unknown. Agnosticism represents a unique, balanced perspective in the landscape of belief. Unlike positions that either reject belief outright or accept it without question, agnosticism occupies a thoughtful middle ground. To understand this balance, consider how agnosticism fits within the broader spectrum of belief. This positioning allows agnostics to engage with questions of existence without committing to absolute certainties. This balanced approach mirrors how we see excellence in scientific inquiry. Consider Dr. Sarah Chen, a climate researcher who approaches her work with methodical skepticism. She doesn't dismiss climate data, nor does she accept it without rigorous testing. This balanced perspective is rooted in intellectual humility, a quality that agnosticism naturally cultivates. Intellectual humility involves curiosity, openness, respect for different viewpoints, and the ability to tolerate ambiguity. We see this balanced approach valued in our judicial systems. Judge Martinez presides over complex cases by maintaining neutrality, neither presuming guilt nor innocence, but carefully weighing evidence. This agnostic approach to truth-seeking ensures fair outcomes. This balanced perspective proves invaluable in promoting open-minded discourse. In our polarized world, agnostic thinking creates space for genuine dialogue, where different viewpoints can be explored without the pressure of absolute commitment. In our ever-evolving world, agnosticism offers a valuable framework for navigating uncertainty. It provides a balanced perspective that honors both the limits of human knowledge and the importance of remaining open to new understanding. At its heart, agnosticism is not about giving up or admitting defeat. It's about embracing one of the most fundamental aspects of the human experience: uncertainty. Consider a research scientist standing at the edge of a new discovery. She doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, she says, "I don't know yet, but I'm willing to explore." This is the essence of intellectual humility that agnosticism embodies. Agnosticism champions critical thinking as a way of life. It asks us to question not just religious beliefs, but our assumptions about everything. What do we really know? How do we know it? What evidence supports our beliefs? Think of a child looking through a telescope for the first time. Their eyes widen with wonder at the vastness of space, at how much they don't know. That sense of awe and curiosity, that's what agnosticism preserves in adults. In our daily lives, agnosticism teaches us to hold our beliefs lightly. A parent might say to their child, "I believe this is right, but I could be wrong. Let's explore it together." This creates space for growth and learning. Agnosticism doesn't ask us to abandon hope or meaning. Instead, it invites us to find beauty in the questions themselves. The mystery of existence becomes not a problem to solve, but a wonder to experience. So agnosticism stands as a gentle reminder. In a universe full of questions, it's okay not to have all the answers. What matters is how we live with the questions, with curiosity, humility, and an open heart.